The stale, warm air of a late December evening still clung to the room's heat, heavy with the ghosts of a dozen Christmas guests. The sour scent of leftover food, the wallpaper stained with the phantom laughter of a large family, and the countless expensive glasses scattered across the hardwood floor, all of it pressed down on Eleanor like a physical weight. After working non-stop all day, her 70-year-old body had passed its limit. Her fingertips were numb and puffy from washing up liquid, and a searing pain shot through her lower back as if a hot iron were pressed against it. Eleanor had arrived at her son's flat at 5 o'clock that morning, while the winter frost was still crisp on the pavement. Today was Christmas Day, and for her only son, Arthur, his wife, Clara, and the 6 members of Clara's family who had gathered in their home, Eleanor had stood alone in the enormous island kitchen, slaving away. She had slow-cooked a large joint of beef, roasted mountains of potatoes and parsnips, and meticulously prepared a traditional sherry trifle, her late husband's favorite. She washed the endless stream of large serving platters and refilled empty glasses with chilled elderflower pressé. Not a single person offered a word of thanks. As if it were her sole purpose, Eleanor was treated as a convenient, invisible presence. It was past 10 in the evening when the feast finally wound down. While Clara's relatives lounged in the living room, watching the massive television, Eleanor washed the last dish and polished the sink until it gleamed like a mirror. Her body felt like a sponge, soaked in muddy water. The thought of taking 3 changes on the tube to get back to her small council flat in Hackney was utterly draining. She had no energy left. Timidly, Eleanor approached Clara in the living room. Draped in a designer silk dressing gown, Clara was scrolling idly through her top-of-the-range smartphone, a bored expression on her face. "Clara." Eleanor's voice was so faint and frail it surprised even herself. Clara looked up slowly, her annoyance barely concealed. A flicker of irritation crossed her beautiful, almond-shaped eyes. "You see," Eleanor began, "it's gotten so late, and I'm completely exhausted. If it wouldn't be too much trouble, I was wondering if I might possibly stay here, just for tonight." The moment the words left her lips, the atmosphere in the living room froze. Only the boisterous laughter from the television seemed to echo loudly in the silence. Clara's beautiful face hardened into an emotionless mask. She rose slowly to her feet and, in a voice as quiet and cold as a blade, spoke with deliberate, cutting precision. "Eleanor, are you under some sort of misapprehension?" Eleanor's heart clenched as if plunged into ice water. "This is not a hotel." Her voice was clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. Clara's relatives turned to stare at Eleanor, their eyes filled with a mixture of amusement and contempt. Eleanor looked desperately towards her son, Arthur, for help. But Arthur simply sat beside his wife, staring down at the tips of his expensive slippers. His silence was deeper and sharper than Clara's words, a wound that seemed to negate the entirety of Eleanor's 70 years of life. "And as you can see," Clara continued, "my family is staying over. It would be far too cramped with you here. It would be an inconvenience for everyone. Now, it's time for you to go home." Clara gestured towards the front door with a flick of her chin. "Get out!" The gesture was the most profound insult Eleanor had ever endured. The blood drained from her body, and a deep, crushing despair washed over her, even before anger could take root. She had no strength left to argue. Eleanor silently bowed her head and, on trembling legs, walked to the front door. Feeling the cold stares on her back, she quietly opened it and stepped out into the night's darkness. The sound of the door shutting mercilessly behind her seemed to extinguish all the light from her world. Eleanor stood motionless on the pavement, dimly lit by a single street lamp. The cold winter air made her teary eyes blur even more. But she did not cry. Instead, from her worn fabric handbag, she pulled out an incongruously sleek, latest model smartphone. With a trembling finger, she dialed a number and held the phone to her ear. "It's me," she said. "I need a pickup." Her voice held none of the frailty from moments before. It was the voice of a ruler, unquestioning, decisive, and filled with an icy resolve. Who had she called? And what was her true identity? The night of humiliation had only just begun. Rewind the clock by 3 days. In a small council flat in Hackney, a corner of London, far from the city's glamour, was Eleanor's sanctuary. The single room was adorned only with a smiling photograph of her late husband, George, and a few modest houseplants. Yet, its small kitchen had been transformed into the richest place on earth. Carrots, parsnips, onions fresh from the market, and still smelling of earth were carefully washed and decoratively cut by Eleanor. She meticulously trimmed the excess fat from a large turkey and prepared a rich, savory stuffing that filled the room with the warm, festive aroma of sage and thyme. This was the meal that her son, Arthur, had loved most as a child, the taste of a happy Christmas. "Does he still love it?" she wondered, carefully skimming the fat from the gravy. Raising Arthur alone after her husband passed away had been anything but easy. She had worked multiple jobs, often unable to afford a single new dress for herself, but she never failed to pay for his textbooks and school trips. She had put herself last, her entire life dedicated to her son's future. Eleanor knew that Arthur had recently suffered a significant financial loss from a failed investment, a six-figure sum that had shaken the confidence he always wore so easily. It was his first major setback. That was why, this Christmas, she wanted to fill his belly with his favorite foods and lift his spirits. It was with this single-minded devotion that she stood over the stove. Beside the simmering gravy, a pot of fruit was gently bubbling for the trifle. As she wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, she layered the sponge, fruit, custard, and cream with practiced care. Arthur used to devour half the trifle by himself. The memory of his happy, cream-smeared face brought a natural smile to her lips. It was for moments like these, she thought, that she was alive. Just then, the smartphone on her table buzzed with a sterile electronic tone. The name on the screen was Clara. Wiping her wet hands on a tea towel, Eleanor opened the message. "Eleanor, thank you for preparing for Christmas. So sorry for the short notice, but my parents, my aunt and uncle, and my cousin will be joining us this year. That makes 6 extra people. I know it's a huge ask, but could you please prepare enough food for all of them as well? Thank you ever so much." For a moment, Eleanor's finger froze over the screen. Her breath caught in her throat. 6 more people. The food she had prepared was nowhere near enough, and why should she be the one to provide for Clara's relatives, who were strangers to her? The message, though politely worded, contained not a shred of gratitude or concern for the effort it would take. It was a thoughtless, one-sided command. A heavy weariness settled over her, along with a small spark of anger burning in her chest. But Eleanor took a slow breath and placed the phone face down. The image that came to her mind was not of Clara's arrogant face, but of her beloved son, who had grown so thin and withdrawn lately. He can't be caught in the middle, she thought. If she refused, Clara would surely take it out on Arthur. She wanted to avoid, at all costs, her son feeling small and powerless in front of his wife. If a little more effort from her could prevent that, then so be it. It was always this way. Telling herself this, Eleanor tightened the strings of her apron and returned to the kitchen. She had to add many more items to her shopping list. But as she bent down to move a heavy casserole dish, a sharp, stabbing pain, unlike anything she had ever felt, pierced deep in her side, as if she'd been struck with a heated poker. "Ah!" she gasped, crumbling to the floor. Her breathing became shallow as a cold sweat beaded on her forehead. What was that pain? After a moment, it receded like a wave, as if it had been a phantom. Eleanor slowly stood up, steadying her breath. "Just my age," she tried to tell herself. "Perhaps I've been overdoing it." But the clear danger signal her body had sent remained a small, dark, and unsettling stain in the corner of her mind. Eleanor's day began in the pre-dawn gloom. She left her old flat in Hackney and endured an hour-long journey on the rattling, crowded tube. Her destination was a skyscraper that pierced the London sky in Mayfair. The Imperial Grand London, lauded as the finest 5-star hotel in the United Kingdom. But she didn't enter through the main entrance, where magnificent chandeliers cast a dazzling light. Her entrance was a heavy steel door in a dim alleyway, the staff-only service entrance. Beyond it lay another world, one that smelled of disinfectant and dampness. "Morning, Eleanor." Her colleagues greeted her as she changed into her plain navy work uniform in the locker room. Her official title here was housekeeping staff. This was the mask Eleanor showed the world. "Eleanor, morning. a voice called out. "You look a bit peaky. Are you all right?" It was her colleague, Brenda, 2 years her junior at 68. Having also lost her husband early, Brenda was the only friend to whom Eleanor revealed a small part of her true self. "Thanks, Brenda. Just a bit tired, that's all." Getting ready for Christmas, Eleanor replied with a gentle smile, but Brenda peered at her with concern. "You always push yourself too hard. I know it's for your son, but you've got to look after yourself. Love." The warm words were a comfort, but also a sharp reminder of her own neglect. Eleanor was assigned to the rooms on the 15th to 20th floors, the executive floors, a world away from the standard rooms. She worked silently, changing sheets, polishing the marble bathrooms until not a single water spot remained, and ensuring not a speck of dust was missed. Her movements were efficient, without a single wasted motion. The work was physically demanding for a 70-year-old, but Eleanor found a strange satisfaction in it. The rooms were mirrors of the people who stayed in them. Some were left tidy, others were ransacked. Forgotten items told fragments of life stories. Through cleaning, Eleanor silently pieced together the tales of strangers. Cleaning the VIP suites on the top floors was her special responsibility. These rooms, used by foreign dignitaries and global celebrities, demanded a perfection beyond perfection. The general manager often assigned them to her personally, trusting no one else. That day, Eleanor was cleaning the royal suite on the 20th floor alone. A vast living room, a bathroom of pure marble, and, outside the window, a breathtaking panorama of the London skyline. As she finished her final checks, she noticed a faint speck of dust on the underside of a large leaf on a monstera plant in the corner. It was a tiny imperfection that 100 other staff members would have missed, but not Eleanor. With a damp cloth, she gently wiped each leaf, one by one. The act was less like cleaning and more like a sacred ritual. Just as she finished and turned to leave, the heavy mahogany door behind her opened silently. A distinguished older gentleman in a flawlessly tailored suit stood there. He was a man Eleanor often saw on the financial news, someone who carried an air of authority far greater than the hotel's own general manager. "Good afternoon, madam," the man said, bowing his head deeply, not the kind of gesture an employee would make to a member of the cleaning staff. "Mr. Harrison," Eleanor acknowledged. The man, Harrison, maintained his respectful posture. "Madam Chairman," he continued, "I trust you are well. Your duties today are complete." Madam Chairman. That single phrase inverted the entire power dynamic of the room. Housekeeper Eleanor Vance was a disguise. Her true identity was the owner and chairwoman of this multi-billion-pound luxury hotel group. "Is there anything to report?" Eleanor's tone shifted instantly from that of a mild-mannered cleaner to that of an all-seeing executive. Her gaze was sharp, as if it could pierce right through to Harrison's soul. "Just one matter, concerning your son, Mr. Arthur Vance." Eleanor raised a hand, cutting him off. "Not while I'm on the clock, Harrison. And my son's affairs are my own problem." Her eyes held a mixture of a mother's gentleness and an absolute solitude that allowed no one to intrude. Why did she, a woman who controlled everything, continue to live this life? Behind the mask lay a secret that only Harrison knew, but no one yet truly understood the profound reason for it. Meanwhile, in a sleek office at a rival luxury hotel, the Sterling, Clara Vance was tapping her fingers impatiently on her desk. Her team stood around her, holding their breath, waiting for her next instruction. As team leader, Clara cultivated an atmosphere of tense perfectionism and cold ambition. Only her desk was immaculate, like a surgeon's sterile table. "So, the update on the Imperial Grand London Partnership?" Clara's sharp voice cut through the silent office. She was betting her entire career on securing an exclusive wedding partnership with the Imperial Grand, the pinnacle of the British hotel industry. This massive project, worth millions annually, was her guaranteed path to a director position, and beyond that, the coveted glory of a seat on the board. "Well, team lead," a subordinate reported nervously, "we're in contact with the relevant department, but things aren't moving at the operational level. They keep saying that everything depends on the final approval of the chairwoman." Clara barely suppressed a scowl. An expression of pure disdain crossed her face. If we can't get anywhere with the managers, then we aim higher. Who has the real decision-making power? Find that out. You're all useless. Honestly. Clara's frustration wasn't just about the contract. Her husband, Arthur, had recently lost a six-figure sum on a bad investment. It was an unforgivable failure that tarnished the perfect power couple image she had carefully constructed. The financial loss and her profound disappointment in her husband were eating away at her, and the outlet for that frustration was often directed at the weakest target available, her mother-in-law, Eleanor. That woman is utterly useless, Clara fumed internally. She was deeply ashamed of the fact that her mother-in-law worked as a cleaner at the very hotel she was trying to partner with. Whenever the topic of family came up during glamorous dinners with friends, she would have to lie, "Oh, Arthur's mother lives a quiet life at home." The humiliation only amplified her contempt. The very idea that Eleanor was connected to her glittering life was intolerable. During this time, a colleague approached her. "Clara, didn't you say your mother-in-law works at the Imperial Grand? Couldn't she get us some inside information? You know, from the staff gossip chain or something." Clara's face hardened instantly. She placed her expensive fountain pen down on the desk with a sharp click. "Don't be ridiculous. My mother-in-law is just a part-time cleaner." As if someone at that level would know anything about high-level corporate decisions. It would be a complete waste of time. Her voice was laced with such clear disdain and rejection that her colleagues said no more. To Clara, her mother-in-law was not a resource to be used, but a problem to be erased. That afternoon, Clara called her mother, Diana. Diana had worked for years as a VIP concierge at another luxury hotel and was well versed in the industry's secrets. "Mother, about the Imperial Grand deal. Do you know any key players I can connect with? I'm hitting a brick wall." "Well, dear," Diana said, "the person at the top there is a mysterious chairwoman who is famously private. No one has ever seen her. But the one who effectively greenlights every project is her chief of staff, a man named Harrison. He reports directly to her. Unless you get past him, you're going nowhere." Mr. Harrison, chief of staff. And a mysterious chairwoman. A predatory gleam entered Clara's eyes. Finally, a lead. She would secure this contract, no matter what it took. She would use anything and anyone to get it. In her mind, she could already see herself ascending the ladder of success. Clothed in the thick armor of her ambition, Clara had yet to realize the cruel truth that the mysterious, powerful chairwoman she so desperately needed to impress was the very same person she despised and looked down upon most, her mother-in-law, Eleanor. She was oblivious to the ironic twist of fate that was rapidly approaching. On Christmas Day, the living room of Arthur and Clara's flat was completely occupied by Clara's relatives. They sprawled across the expensive sofas as if they owned the place, shouting crude jokes and ordering Eleanor about with jerks of their chins. Eleanor didn't have a moment's rest. She served the food she'd been preparing since dawn, poured wine, wiped up the orange juice a child had spilled, and tackled the mountain of washing up. She must have made dozens of trips between the kitchen and the living room. "Oh, this gravy is a bit rich, isn't it?" Clara's aunt commented, her mouth turned down in a grimace. Her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Couldn't you make something a little more refined?" "Eleanor," Clara said, shooting her a cold, admonishing look. "I did tell you my family prefers lighter flavors." Eleanor bit her lip. She had been so careful with the seasoning, yet still they complained. She glanced at Arthur, but he just looked away awkwardly and took a sip of his beer, pretending not to hear. Her son's attitude chipped away at her heart like a slow-acting poison. "And couldn't you get the roast potatoes a bit crispier?" Clara's father grumbled, prodding one with his fork. "The oil you use tastes a bit old." The insults came one after another. Eleanor's presence was completely ignored. Only the food she made was put on trial and criticized, like a failed entry in a cooking competition. Yet, Eleanor endured it all. This was a test, she told herself, a hardship she had to swallow for the sake of her beloved son's peaceful life in this home. She retightened her apron, forced a smile, and bowed her head. "I'm so sorry. I'll be more careful next time." Each time she apologized, the smug satisfaction on the faces of Clara's relatives carved another small wound in her heart. The long, long day finally ended. Well past 10 o'clock at night, the relatives showed no signs of leaving and had started on post-dinner drinks. It was then that an exhausted Eleanor, in a last-ditch plea, asked to stay the night, and the fateful words from the beginning of the story were uttered. "Eleanor, are you under some sort of misapprehension? This is not a hotel." Clara's cold voice pierced the very depths of Eleanor's soul. It wasn't just a refusal, it was a clear declaration. "You are not a member of this family. You are merely the help." And then, Arthur's treacherous silence. His own mother was being insulted by his wife, and he simply sat there, head bowed. That silence betrayed Eleanor more eloquently than 10,000 insults. It confirmed that her son was now completely under his wife's control. In that instant, something inside Eleanor snapped. It was the last thread of patience she had held onto for 40 years, solely for her son's sake. Since the day her husband died, she had endured every injustice, every hardship, believing she could sacrifice everything to protect her son's smile. But now, that very son had abandoned her. There was nothing left to protect. All the strength drained from her body. But it wasn't a feeling of weakness. It was a strange lightness, as if she had been freed from a great burden. "Enough. I don't have to endure this anymore. I'm done killing myself for their sake." Eleanor slowly lifted her head. The look in her eyes was no longer one of sadness. It was the quiet, blazing fire of an anger that could incinerate everything in its path. Clara, her relatives, and even Arthur were stunned into silence by the sudden transformation of the meek mother-in-law who had always responded to everything with a mumbled apology. The atmosphere shifted. The temperature in the living room seemed to drop several degrees. Everyone watched, holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The fuse of Eleanor's counterattack had just been lit quietly, but unmistakably. "I see." The words that escaped Eleanor's lips were surprisingly quiet, but they were laced with a tremendous rage, like magma churning deep beneath the earth. The loud television and the relatives' whispers all fell silent. In the stillness, Eleanor's voice echoed with an unnatural clarity. "This isn't a hotel. Is that what you said, Clara?" Eleanor took a slow step forward. The look in her eyes was no longer that of a frightened old woman. It held the blazing fury of an all-consuming fire. Clara, her relatives, and even Arthur were speechless at the transformation. "Let me tell you all something." Eleanor's voice grew louder, thundering through the living room like a judgment. "I have worked like a slave for this family since 5 o'clock this morning. Every single thing that has passed your lips, I made it. All of it. Alone. The drinks you're holding, I served them. The floor your child dirtied, I cleaned it. The sheer force of her presence was so overwhelming that no one could utter a word in response. Even Clara's father, who had been lounging arrogantly on the sofa, was frozen in place. Not one word of thanks, just complaint after complaint. And to top it all off, you're going to throw an exhausted old woman out into the street in the middle of the night? Is that what you call basic human decency?" Eleanor pointed a trembling finger at the plates of half-eaten food on the table, the remnants of her trampled labor. "Arthur!" She pointed that same trembling finger at her son. Arthur flinched violently, as if struck. He was terrified, paralyzed by this version of his mother he had never seen before. "Are you even my son? Are you going to tell me you didn't notice how your wife and her family have looked down on me, humiliated me? For 40 years, after your father died, who do you think I struggled for? Who did I grit my teeth and live for? It was to give you a better life than I ever had, you ungrateful child." Her soul-deep cry struck Arthur like a physical blow. His face turned pale, and he could only stammer, I. In that moment, a flood of memories of his mother's countless sacrifices rushed back to him. But it was too late. "There's nothing left here," Eleanor realized. Love, connection, gratitude, it had all been an illusion. She turned on her heel and walked towards the door, no longer faltering, but with a dignified stride. "Wait, Mother!" Arthur finally managed to choke out, but his voice was weak and hollow. With her hand on the doorknob, Eleanor spoke without looking back. Her voice was as cold and unforgiving as the Arctic ice. "You will regret this day. Make no mistake." Slam. Eleanor stormed out of the flat. The living room she left behind was deathly quiet. No one could quite process what had just happened. Clara's relatives quickly made their excuses. "Well, we should be going now," and fled as if escaping a disaster. Left alone, Clara's face twisted in fury as she glared at Arthur. "This is the worst Christmas ever, and it's all your mother's fault." Arthur couldn't say a word. His mother's final curse-like words echoed over and over in his head. "You will regret this day." He did not yet understand the true weight of those words. In that moment, the gears of their fate had begun to turn, quietly but irrevocably, towards a ruin from which there was no return. No one yet knew that this confrontation was merely the prelude to a colossal storm that would shatter all of their lives. Outside the apartment building, the damp, cold air of a typical winter night clung to the asphalt. Lit by the faint glow of a street lamp, Eleanor began to walk, her body unsteady. The rage that had consumed her moments before had given way to a hollow emptiness. She didn't know where to go or what to do. The only certainty was that she would never return to that home. She could never return. Just then, the near silent hum of an engine stopped beside her. A car had glided to a halt at her side. Turning, Eleanor's eyes fell upon a Mercedes Maybach, its jet-black finish deeper than the night itself. Before she could register her surprise at the presence of such an opulent vehicle, the rear door opened silently from the inside. Emerging from the car was the man she knew as Harrison, her chief of staff. "Madam Chairman, we've come to collect you." Harrison bowed deeply and respectfully, as if nothing at all were out of the ordinary. His voice and demeanor were as formal as ever. Without a word, Eleanor let herself sink into the soft Napa leather seat. As the door closed, the outside world's noise and damp chill were sealed away, replaced by perfect silence. The faint scent of sandalwood permeated the car's interior. The car began to move, gliding through the city streets as if on water. Eleanor stared blankly at the scenery passing by. Memories of her late husband, George, flooded her mind. They had been poor, working together to run a small mechanics workshop in a working-class neighborhood. George had always said, "I'm sorry for all the hardship, Eleanor, but I swear, our Arthur won't have the life we did. We'll give him the best education, make him a fine man." Those words became her husband's last will and testament. After George succumbed to a sudden illness, Eleanor took what little savings they had and the life insurance payout and worked tirelessly. She sold the workshop and, with that capital, made a small investment in property. It was the beginning of everything. A small gamble that everyone scoffed at rode the wave of a changing economy, and combined with Eleanor's sharp foresight, her assets grew exponentially. Before she knew it, she had built a corporate empire that led the British hotel industry. But with great wealth came profound loneliness. To fulfill her promise to her husband that their son would never struggle for money, she gave Arthur the best of everything. At the same time, she kept her identity as the head of a massive corporation, a closely guarded secret. She wanted to protect him from the world of sycophants drawn to money. More importantly, she wanted Arthur to build his own life, not with the power of money, but with his own strength, and to grow into a man who understood the struggles of others. To that end, she herself had worked as a cleaner, trying to show him the dignity of labor through her own example. Today, that hope had been brutally shattered, a son who turned a blind eye while his mother was being humiliated. Wealth and status do not build character. Eleanor now understood this with painful clarity. "Harrison," Eleanor spoke for the first time. "Was I wrong?" Her voice was weak and trembling. The earlier anger was gone, replaced by the deep regret of a mother. Harrison met her eyes in the rearview mirror and answered quietly, "Madam Chairman, there has never been anything wrong with the path you have chosen. However, I respectfully suggest that there is no need for you to endure any more pain. You have done more than enough." At his words, something in Eleanor's eyes hardened into resolve. Yes, it's over. Her role as a mother was finished. From now on, she would not act as Eleanor Vance, the meek mother, but as the chairwoman of the Imperial Grand London. She had to make them understand. She had to make that family comprehend the true meaning of what they had done, down to the very marrow of their bones. Soon, the Maybach was gliding in a direction completely opposite to Eleanor's humble flat in Hackney. When Eleanor looked up, through the windscreen she saw her castle, the one she had built single-handedly, the Imperial Grand London, soaring into the night sky. The car came to a stop in a private underground car park, in a single, specially reserved space at the far end. It was her designated spot as chairwoman. Eleanor Vance quietly removed the heavy mask of mother. Underneath, what emerged was the face of a queen, filled with a cold and steely determination. In the days following Eleanor's departure, a heavy, awkward silence hung over Arthur and Clara's flat, like stagnant air. Arthur, unable to summon the courage to contact his mother, spent his days in a listless haze, unable to focus on his work. The words his mother had hurled at him, "You will regret this day," reverberated in his mind like a curse. The coldness in her voice haunted his sleep, and the image of her blazing eyes was seared into his memory. Meanwhile, Clara's desperation grew daily. The partnership deal with the Imperial Grand London had hit a complete dead end. No matter how many times she tried to contact the key figure, Mr. Harrison, the response was always the same, polite but frigid automated reply. "I am unable to provide any information until the chairwoman's approval has been granted." It was like being blocked by a thick, invisible wall. "What is going on?" Clara screamed hysterically in her office. Rumors that a rival company had secured a smaller collaboration with the Imperial Grand reached her ears, tearing her pride to shreds. At this rate, her career was in jeopardy. Worse, she would lose face in front of the useless subordinates she had lorded over. Pushed into a corner, an idea sparked in Clara's mind. It involved the very person she had held in contempt, the person she wished would simply disappear from her life, her mother-in-law. Of course, she thought. Eleanor may be just a cleaner, but she's worked at that hotel for 10 years. Because she's at the bottom, she might know things, the internal politics, gossip about the senior staff. What kind of person is this Harrison? What does he like? What are his weaknesses? Any scrap of information would be a lifeline. She was clutching at straws. In the face of her ambition, her anger from Christmas Day now seemed like a trivial matter. That evening, Clara confronted Arthur. "You need to call your mother." "What for?" Arthur replied weakly, slumped on the sofa. "Isn't it obvious? To get inside information about the Imperial Grand, gossip from the other cleaners, what this Harrison character is really like. She must know something." Arthur's face twisted in disgust at her utterly calculating words. "Are you serious? After you threw her out, now you want to use her? There's no way I can do that. Have you no heart? And why can't you? You're her son, aren't you? You can at least make a phone call. Or what? Is my career supposed to go down the drain because of your failed investment that's left us in a financial mess? Who do you think pays for this flat?" Clara expertly twisted the knife of Arthur's guilt. Weighed down by the shame of his debt, he couldn't argue back forcefully. After hours of relentless persuasion, an exhausted Arthur finally gave in. He sat down heavily in front of his phone. The 2 words on the screen, "Mum," felt as heavy as lead. He took several deep breaths and, steeling himself, pressed the call button. After a few rings, a voice colder than he remembered answered. "Hello? Mum? It's me, Arthur. Are you doing all right?" The emotionless voice sent a chill down his spine. About the other day, I'm so sorry. Just as he began to apologize, Eleanor cut him off. "What do you want?" Her voice held not a trace of warmth or concern for her son. Arthur was momentarily speechless, but feeling the silent pressure from Clara, who was listening in beside him, he hesitantly got to the point. "Well, actually, there's something I wanted to ask you. At the hotel where you work, there's a chief of staff named Mr. Harrison, right? I was just wondering if you knew anything about him. It's for Clara's work." A long, long silence followed on the other end of the line. It was a terrifying silence that felt like it was freezing the blood in Arthur's veins. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice as quiet and sharp as a razor. "Arthur." "Yes? What, exactly, is a mother to you? Am I just a tool you can use for your own convenience, pretending to apologize just to get information?" The words struck the most painful part of Arthur's soul, eviscerating him. He had no response. Because it was the absolute truth. Don't contact me again. Click. The line went dead. The monotonous dial tone echoed emptily in his ear. Arthur stood frozen, clutching the phone. He realized, in that moment, that the warm, unbreakable bond he thought he had with his mother had just been completely severed by his own hand, and he did not yet know the true terror that this severance would bring. Despite the scathing rejection from her mother-in-law, Clara could not give up. She used every connection she had, relentlessly pursuing an approach to the Imperial Grand London. She swallowed her pride and sent proposal after proposal, no matter how many times she was ignored. It seemed her persistence paid off. One afternoon, the phone on her desk finally rang. The caller ID displayed the hotel's main number. "Is this Miss Clara Vance, team lead? This is Mr. Harrison, Chief of Staff at the Imperial Grand London. Regarding the wedding partnership proposal you sent, our chairwoman has expressed an interest in hearing about it from you directly." The moment she heard those words, Clara felt a surge of triumph so powerful she clenched her fist. Yes, I did it! The impenetrable Harrison had finally yielded. And a direct meeting with the mysterious chairwoman. This was it, the final interview. If she could win her over, the contract was as good as signed. All her past humiliations would be redeemed. "We would be grateful if you could join us tomorrow at 2 p.m. in the VIP conference room on the top floor of our hotel," Harrison continued. Yes, of course. I will be there." "Thank you," Clara replied, struggling to keep the excitement from her voice. After hanging up, she couldn't help but do a small victory pump. Her subordinates looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. The feeling was intoxicating. "This changes everything," she thought. "My husband's failure, my setbacks at work, and that useless mother-in-law, I'll leave it all behind and climb even higher." The next day, Clara dressed in her finest designer suit, assembled for this very occasion, and headed to the Imperial Grand London with a flawless presentation. She crossed the opulent lobby and took the private VIP lift to the top floor. The reflection in the mirror was a woman glowing with confidence. Her heart pounded with anticipation. The VIP conference room she was shown into was immense. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of London that made her feel as if she held the world in her hands. A single, massive table dominated the room, and what looked like an original Picasso hung on the wall. At Mr. Harrison's gesture, Clara sat down in a soft, leather-upholstered chair. "The chairwoman will be with you shortly." At Harrison's words, Clara straightened her back and swallowed hard. What kind of person would she be? The legendary chairwoman who never appeared in the media. She imagined a formidable, steely executive. It would be the toughest negotiation of her career, but she was ready. She would not lose. Presently, the grand mahogany door at the far end of the room opened silently. Clara prepared her most perfect smile and began to rise to her feet. But the moment she saw the person who entered, Clara's world came to a complete stop. Her breath caught in her throat. The smile froze on her face. Her body, halfway out of the chair, collapsed back down as if the strings of a puppet had been cut. The blood drained from her fingertips, and the files she was holding scattered across the floor. The person who had walked in was her mother-in-law, a familiar face she had looked down on with all her heart. But this was not the Eleanor she knew. She wasn't wearing the worn-out cleaner's uniform. She was dressed in a bespoke suit of the finest silk, tailored to fit her perfectly. Her eyes, though calm, were filled with a regal authority that saw through everything. Around her neck gleamed a necklace of large pearls that must have been worth more than several years' rent on her Hackney flat. Her entire presence was that of a monarch. Eleanor gave the stunned and speechless Clara a cursory glance, then walked slowly to the head of the enormous table and sat down without a hint of hesitation. "Eleanor, why? Why are you here?" Clara managed to stammer out, her voice a pathetic whimper. Hearing this, Eleanor's expression changed for the first time. A cold, icy smile touched her lips. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Clara Vance of the Sterling Hotel Group." Eleanor's voice was not the warm, gentle tone of her mother-in-law. It was the low, heavy, and unassailable voice of a corporate titan, a ruler whose authority could not be questioned. "I am Eleanor Vance, the chairwoman of the Imperial Grand London." As she spoke, Eleanor slid a single, gold-embossed business card across the table. With a trembling hand, Clara picked it up. The words, Eleanor Vance, chairwoman, burned into her vision like a devil's brand. Her mind went blank. She couldn't process what was happening. Her cleaner mother-in-law, the useless old woman she had despised, insulted, and thrown out of her house, telling her this isn't a hotel, was now sitting before her as the absolute power who held her entire destiny in her hands. Faced with this cruel, impossible reality, the armor of Clara's ambition shattered into a million pieces. And beneath it, all that was left was her own small, powerless self, trembling with pure terror. The air in the VIP conference room felt like a vacuum, stealing the breath from Clara's lungs. The presence of her mother-in-law, now revealed as an absolute authority figure, was an unbearable weight pressing down on her. She couldn't even bring herself to pick up the documents scattered at her feet. All she could do was shiver. "Now then," Eleanor said, her voice devoid of all emotion, "let's see this ambitious project of yours." The coldness in her tone was enough to freeze Clara's heart solid. With a trembling hand, Clara managed to push forward a spare copy of her presentation. Eleanor took the thick document, flipped through a few pages with feigned interest, and then placed it back on the table with a dismissive tap. A very impressive plan. However, it is missing the most crucial perspective entirely. A crucial perspective? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. She couldn't bring herself to call her Madam Chairman, and was utterly lost. For the first time, Eleanor's eyes met Clara's directly. They were as deep and cold as a bottomless lake. Clara was pinned by her gaze, unable to move. Yes, respect for people. The words were like 1,000 needles piercing Clara's heart. The core principle we value most at the Imperial Grand London is respect and gratitude, not just for our guests, but for every single employee who works here. The people who clean the rooms, who wash the dishes, the doormen. Without every one of them, this hotel could not function. But you judge people by their profession. You look down on those in positions weaker than your own, and you treat them like servants without a shred of gratitude. What possible merit is there for us to partner with a project led by someone like you? Eleanor's words were quiet, but each one was a precise indictment of Clara's sins. Her own arrogant behavior on Christmas Day flashed through her mind like a nightmare. The gravy is too rich, the potatoes aren't crispy, this isn't a hotel. All those words had now returned like boomerangs to strike her down. She had nothing to say in her defense. "This meeting is over," Eleanor declared coldly, rising to her feet. "This partnership is cancelled, effective immediately." It was the moment Clara's career, her pride, and her future shattered into dust. "Wait, Eleanor, please," Clara cried, falling to her knees on the floor. But Eleanor did not look back once as she and Harrison exited the room. The news traveled quickly back to Clara's company. Management held her fully responsible for ruining a long-sought-after major contract. She was stripped of her team lead position and demoted to a regional subsidiary, a move that was effectively a notice of dismissal. But Eleanor's retribution did not end there. An internal audit team, acting on her anonymous tip, launched an industry-wide investigation. The results revealed that Clara's mother, Diana, had been using her position as a VIP concierge for years to accept illicit kickbacks from partner companies. Diana was dishonorably discharged and permanently blacklisted from the industry. "How could this happen?" Diana wailed, having lost her job and social standing, turning on her daughter. "This is all your fault for angering that mother-in-law of yours. What have you done?" "My fault? You're the one who was taking bribes, Mother. Don't you dare pin the blame on me." The mother and daughter, once close accomplices, now turned on each other with vicious words, each trying to shift the blame. The family bond they shared crumbled with shocking ease. Having lost everything, Clara was served with divorce papers by Arthur and evicted from their luxury flat. Alone in a tiny studio apartment, she hugged her knees. Her heart was not filled with regret or remorse, but with a dark, festering hatred for Eleanor. "It's all that old woman's fault. She ruined my life." Day by day, the hatred grew, leading her thoughts into dangerous territory. Yes, it would be better if she were just gone. A manic, insane light flickered in Clara's eyes. "If Eleanor dies, Arthur will inherit everything. The hotel would become ours. I could get a massive settlement. The terror of her fall from grace had stripped away her last shred of sanity. Consumed by this demonic idea, Clara did not know that at the very moment she harbored this dark wish, the flame of Eleanor's life was genuinely in danger of being extinguished. After the phone call with her son, Eleanor sank deep into a sofa in her private residence on the top floor of the Imperial Grand London. Outside the window, the city lights sparkled like scattered jewels, but the beautiful view brought no comfort to her heart. Her son's voice, his calculating words, echoed in her ears. "So that's all I am to him." A profound emptiness chilled her to the bone. Just then, the pain struck again. A savage, searing agony deep in her side, as if a hot iron rod were being twisted inside her. Eleanor gasped, curling her body to endure the pain. She could feel a cold sweat breaking out through her silk blouse. Recently, these attacks had become more frequent and more intense. And that wasn't all. Her limbs felt constantly heavy, as if she were dragging lead weights. In the mornings, her face and ankles would be so swollen that her wedding ring, worn for decades, would cut painfully into her finger. It was clear that something was seriously wrong with her body. Eleanor had vaguely realized this, but she had been so consumed by the problems with her son and daughter-in-law that she had continuously put her own health last. The next day, during her cleaning duties at the hotel, Eleanor felt so weak she could barely stand. She leaned against a bathroom wall, gasping for breath. The face staring back at her in the mirror was sallow, with deep, dark circles under the eyes. Her colleague, Brenda, saw her and rushed over, her face pale with alarm. "Eleanor, you look dreadful, like you've seen a ghost. For God's sake, you need to go to a hospital, right now." Her tone was not one of her usual gentle concern. It was filled with genuine urgency. Unable to pretend she was fine any longer, Eleanor allowed Brenda to accompany her to the nearby university hospital affiliated with the hotel. After explaining her symptoms to a young doctor in the general medicine department, his expression grew visibly grave. Blood and urine tests were ordered immediately. As she waited for the results, Eleanor's heart pounded with anxiety. The ticking of the clock in the waiting room seemed deafeningly loud. An hour later, she was called back into the consulting room. The doctor delivered the unbelievable news. "Mrs. Vance, I'll be direct. Your kidneys have almost completely failed." For a moment, Eleanor couldn't comprehend the words. Kidneys. Failed? The test results show you are suffering from extremely severe renal failure. It's what we would call end stage. The swelling, the fatigue, the pain in your side, it was all caused by this. "Frankly, it's a miracle you haven't collapsed before now," the doctor explained calmly but gravely, pointing to a monitor displaying a list of critical test results. Eleanor's mind went white. The doctor's words sounded distant, as if he were talking about someone else. A sand timer, representing her life, had been quietly but surely running out inside her. "If we do nothing, toxins will build up in your body, leading to uremia, which is life-threatening. There are 2 remaining treatment options. One is to undergo dialysis 3 times a week for the rest of your life. The other option is..." The doctor paused, looking directly into Eleanor's eyes. "A kidney transplant." The words landed on Eleanor with a crushing weight. "Do you have family? Children?" the doctor asked. "If we can find a suitable donor, transplant surgery offers the highest chance of returning you to full health. It is the only curative treatment. Could you ask your family for their cooperation?" Family. Her son, Arthur. The moment his face appeared in her mind, a sharp pain shot through Eleanor's chest. Tell the son who had tried to use her, bow her head and beg him to donate a kidney? To Eleanor, that choice felt worse than death itself. "Doctor, please, let me think about it," was all she could manage to say. When she left the hospital, the cold, early spring wind felt especially biting. I might be dying. She had built a vast fortune, owned a giant hotel, and thought she had everything. But now she was facing the absolute limit of life, something money could not fix. She was alone. She hadn't felt such profound loneliness since her husband died. Faced with a treatment that required family support, Eleanor stubbornly refused to seek their help. Whether it was her pride as a chairwoman or her last shred of dignity as a mother, she no longer knew. All she knew was that she had stumbled into a long, dark tunnel, all by herself. As Eleanor began her lonely battle with her fate, her daughter-in-law, Clara, believed she was on the verge of seizing the greatest opportunity of her life. After being rejected, she had relentlessly continued her approach. Finally, a call came from Mr. Harrison at the Imperial Grand London. "Is this Miss Clara Vance, team lead?" "This is Mr. Harrison, Chief of Staff at the Imperial Grand London. Regarding the wedding partnership proposal you sent, our chairwoman has expressed an interest in hearing about it from you directly." The moment she heard those words, Clara felt a surge of triumph so powerful she clenched her fist. Yes, I did it. A direct meeting with the mysterious chairwoman. This was the final interview. If she could win her over, the contract was as good as signed. "We would be grateful if you could join us tomorrow at 2 p.m. in the VIP conference room on the top floor of our hotel," Harrison continued. Yes, of course. I will be there," Clara replied, struggling to keep the excitement from her voice. After hanging up, she did a small victory pump. This changes everything, she thought. My husband's failure, my setbacks at work, I'll leave it all behind and climb even higher. The next day, Clara dressed in her finest designer suit and headed to the Imperial Grand London with a flawless presentation, her heart pounded with anticipation. The VIP conference room was immense, with a panoramic view of London that made her feel as if she held the world in her hands. Mr. Harrison gestured for her to sit. "The chairwoman will be with you shortly." Clara straightened her back. She imagined a formidable, steely executive. Presently, the grand door at the far end of the room opened silently. Clara prepared her most perfect smile and began to rise. But the moment she saw the person who entered, her world came to a complete stop. Her breath caught, her smile froze, her body collapsed back into the chair. The person who had walked in was her mother-in-law, but this was not the Eleanor she knew. Dressed in a bespoke suit of the finest silk, her eyes filled with regal authority, she was the picture of a monarch. Eleanor gave the stunned Clara a cursory glance, then walked to the head of the table and sat down. "Mother," Clara managed to stammer. Eleanor's expression changed, a cold, icy smile touching her lips. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Clara Vance." Her voice was not the warm tone of her mother-in-law, but the low, unassailable voice of a ruler. "I am Eleanor Vance, the chairwoman of the Imperial Grand London." She slid a gold-embossed business card across the table. With a trembling hand, Clara picked it up. The words Eleanor Vance, chairwoman, burned into her vision. Her mind went blank. The cleaner, the useless old woman she had despised, insulted, and evicted, was the absolute power who held her destiny. Faced with this cruel reality, the armor of Clara's ambition shattered. Beneath it was her own small, powerless self, trembling with terror. Clara's words dripped like poison into Arthur's ear, directly assaulting his soul. For a second, he couldn't process their meaning. His own mother was on the verge of death, and this woman was talking about her inheritance? Something inside his head snapped. Slowly, like a rusty automaton, Arthur turned to face Clara. Her eyes were gleaming with greed, and a smirk played on her lips. The sight of that expression broke something inside Arthur, something that could never be repaired. "What?" he rasped, his voice a low, bloody whisper. "What did you just say?" "I'm just saying, we have to consider the what-ifs. You're her only son, it's your right." "Shut up!" Arthur's roar ripped through the solicitor's quiet office. It was the first time in his life he had ever raised his voice to his wife, a raw cry of fury from his very soul. With a hand that shook with rage, he grabbed the front of Clara's jacket. "My mother is dying, and you're calculating your payout? You're not human." Clara and her solicitor recoiled in terror, but Arthur saw nothing. The pathetic man who had always kowtowed to his wife out of guilt for his debts, the cowardly man who had looked away while his mother was being humiliated, all of his foolishness now crashed down on him in a tsunami of regret. He finally realized that he himself was the one who had pushed his mother to the brink of death. "We're finished," he snarled, shoving her away. "Never show your face to me again." Without grabbing any of his belongings, Arthur stormed out of the office. He ran with no destination, just a desperate need to escape the searing guilt that was consuming him. He hailed a taxi on the main road and, in a trembling voice, gave the name of the university hospital where his mother was. In the taxi window, his own reflection was a grotesque mask of tears and regret. Memories of his mother flooded his mind. The gentle hand that had cooled his feverish brow all night when he was a child. The small back that worked from dawn till dusk without a moment to grieve after his father died. The smile she gave him when she told him not to worry about his university fees, a smile that hid a world of hardship. For 40 years, his mother had sacrificed everything for him. And what had he done for her? He had given her nothing in return. Oh God! Arthur broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The taxi driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, but he didn't care. Arriving at the hospital, he practically fell out of the car and ran towards the intensive care unit. Through a glass wall, he saw an older woman he didn't recognize, Brenda, praying and weeping. And beyond the glass was his mother. She was connected to a dozen tubes, a ventilator breathing for her, barely clinging to life. The sight of her frail, broken form solidified his resolve. Spotting a doctor walking past, Arthur grabbed his arm. "Doctor, I'm her son," he cried, his face a mess of tears. "Please, save my mother. She needs a kidney, doesn't she? Then use mine. Please, take my kidney and save her." It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was the only, final act of atonement for the sins he had committed as a son and as a human being. Miraculously, Arthur's kidney was a perfect match. A few days later, when his mother had temporarily regained consciousness, Arthur sat by her bedside and, through his tears, apologized for everything. "Mum, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was such a fool." Eleanor, weak but lucid, shook her head gently and squeezed his hand. "It's all right, Arthur. Just having you here. That's more than enough for me." The thick wall of ice that had stood between them melted away with their shared tears. After 40 years, mother and son had finally, truly reconciled. As their two stretchers were wheeled side by side towards the operating theater, there was no longer any hesitation in their eyes. The life-saving surgery was about to begin. Months later, the kidney transplant, performed by one of the UK's top surgical teams, was a resounding success. The healthy kidney from her son began to function powerfully inside Eleanor's body, and day by day, she regained her health. The new life she received from her son warmed not only her body, but also a heart that had been dried out by years of loneliness and hardship. On the day of her discharge, a fully recovered Arthur was there to meet her. A scar remained on his abdomen, but his expression was brighter and more resolute than ever before. Standing in the soft sunlight at the hospital entrance, Arthur bowed his head deeply to his mother. "Mum, I've made a decision. I want you to let me work at your hotel, from the very bottom." Eleanor looked at her son in surprise, but his eyes were deadly serious. "I want to start with cleaning. The same job you did for all those years. I never understood the people who support the hotel, or the true meaning of work. I want to learn it with my own two hands. With this new body you gave me." These were the words Eleanor had longed to hear for decades. Not a desire for wealth or status, but a plea from the soul to learn human dignity. With tears in her eyes, she nodded slowly and firmly. From that day, Arthur's new life began. Hiding his identity as the chairman's son, he started work as a new housekeeping staff member under the name Mr. Smith. At first, the unaccustomed physical labor was almost too much to bear. But the image of his mother, who had silently performed this work while enduring humiliation, kept him from complaining. He got on his knees to scrub floors, polished fixtures, and cleaned up the rubbish left by guests, just as his mother had done. Through this labor, Arthur learned for the first time the dignity of work and the sting of being in service to others. And every time his colleagues called him Smith, he felt himself being reborn. Clara's life, having been served divorce papers and losing everything, spiraled downwards. Forced out of the luxury flat with a negligible settlement, she was left with only meager savings. Her pride prevented her from finding a new professional job. Soon her savings ran out, and to pay her rent, she was forced to take on day laborer jobs. Ironically, the job she ended up with was as a room cleaner in a small budget hotel in the city center. "You're the new girl? Right, you've got this floor. Get a move on or you'll never finish," a senior staff member barked at her. For the first time, Clara pushed a cleaning cart. The room she opened was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and alcohol, with leftover takeaway food strewn about. She instinctively held her nose, wanting to back away. Fighting the urge to vomit, she pulled on a pair of rubber gloves. And then, just as she had once made her mother-in-law do, she stripped the dirty sheets, cleaned the hair-clogged drain, and got on her hands and knees to scrub the toilet. In that moment, Clara finally understood, in her very bones, the true meaning of what she had done. This is my punishment. At the end of the day, exhausted, she collapsed in the break room, where the economic news was playing on a wall-mounted television. The Imperial Grand London today announced the establishment of a major charitable foundation aimed at improving the living standards and status of workers. At the press conference, Chairwoman Eleanor Vance stated, "All people who work deserve to be treated with equal respect." On the screen, Eleanor, dressed in an elegant suit, spoke with quiet dignity to a crowd of reporters. Beside her, Arthur stood with a gentle smile, watching his mother with pride. Clara stared blankly at the screen from her corner of the filthy break room. That was the place she had once dreamed of standing, but it wasn't her there. The Eleanor on the television was not just the spiteful mother-in-law she had known. This was the image of a true leader, a woman of deep philosophy and humanity. Why couldn't I see it sooner? That there were things more important than wealth and status. A single hot tear traced a path down Clara's cheek. It was the first tear she had ever shed for her own foolishness and the gravity of her sins. Epilogue. 5 years later, Arthur Vance was a different man. He had grown into a strong, thoughtful executive. As promised, he had restarted his career from housekeeping, working his way through every department: dishwasher, doorman, bellboy, front desk clerk, and then into management. He experienced firsthand the hardships and joys of the hotel's operations. People were naturally drawn to him, and he had earned the unwavering trust of the employees. He now served as the managing director of the Imperial Grand London, working as the right-hand man to his mother, Eleanor. Eleanor, too, had found peace. The kidney from her son worked strongly, and her health was excellent. While she retained her position as chairwoman, she entrusted most of the day-to-day operations to Arthur. She now poured her passion into the UK Work Respect Foundation, the charity she had established 5 years prior. The foundation, funded by 30% of the hotel's profits, was dedicated to supporting laborers working in poor conditions or facing unfair treatment. It was the culmination of her lifelong dream, to create a society where all who work are respected. One beautiful spring afternoon, Eleanor and Arthur were strolling through the hotel's vast gardens. Colorful flowers were in full bloom, and a gentle breeze caressed their faces. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it, Mum?" Arthur said with a soft smile. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep kindness. "It is, Arthur." Eleanor's voice was filled with genuine happiness. "To think a day would come when I could walk through this garden so peacefully with you. It feels like a dream." "I was such a fool 5 years ago," he said. "Chasing after money and prestige, I failed to see that the most important thing was right in front of me. I saw nothing, not you, not the people who work so hard." "It's all right," she said. "Everyone makes mistakes. What's important is realizing it and choosing how to live differently. And you have proven that. I'm so proud of you, my son." Arthur smiled, a little embarrassed. The rift of the past was completely gone. In its place was an unbreakable bond, forged by walking hand in hand through the depths of despair. As they walked along a path, they saw a young groundskeeper diligently sweeping leaves. Arthur approached the staff member and, quite naturally, bowed his head deeply. "Thank you for always keeping the gardens so beautiful. Because of your hard work, our guests, and all of us, can enjoy this space." The young man, startled and moved to be addressed so respectfully by the managing director, blushed and quickly bowed in return. No, not at all, sir, thank you." From a short distance away, Eleanor watched the exchange with a loving gaze. Wealth, fame, status, those things do not enrich the human heart. True wealth lies in caring for others, in respecting and thanking them, and in the sincere dedication to one's daily work. Arthur knew that now. The true values his father had entrusted to him, and that his mother had been willing to die to teach him, had been successfully passed on to her son. Eleanor looked up at the sky, a vast, cloudless blue. She saw the face of her late husband there and spoke to him silently in her heart. "Are you watching, my love? Our son has become such a fine man. You have nothing to worry about anymore." The story ends here, but the tale of true wealth that they continue to weave will surely last for eternity. A quiet but powerful beacon of hope for a world where all who work can take pride in their labor and be treated with respect.